The December evening air in Manhattan was crisp and cold as David Chen walked hand in hand with his wife Emma down Fifth Avenue, their breath visible in small clouds as they approached the imposing glass tower that housed Meridian Capital, one of New York's most prestigious investment firms. David adjusted his tie nervously, knowing that tonight's family dinner would be another exercise in humiliation. "You don't have to do this," Emma said softly, squeezing his hand. At 31, Emma possessed a quiet confidence that David had always admired, though he sometimes wondered what she saw in a struggling freelance graphic designer like himself. "Yes, I do," David replied, looking up at the gleaming 40-story building. "Your parents invited us to celebrate your brother's promotion. I can't keep avoiding family events just because they think I'm not good enough for you, Emma." Chen Williams had grown up in privilege that David could barely comprehend. Her father, Richard Williams, was a founding partner at Meridian Capital, while her mother, Patricia, served on the boards of several major corporations. Her older brother Marcus had followed in their father's footsteps, recently becoming the youngest vice president in the firm's history at age 35. David, on the other hand, had grown up in Queens, the son of Chinese immigrants who ran a small restaurant. His parents had sacrificed everything to put him through art school, only to watch him struggle to make a living in New York's competitive, creative industry. After 5 years of marriage, he still felt like an outsider in Emma's world of country clubs, charity galas, and seven-figure investment deals. The elevator whisked them up to the 42nd floor, where Meridian Capital's executive dining room offered breathtaking views of Central Park and the Hudson River. The private restaurant was a symbol of the firm's success, reserved for partners and their most important clients. David, Emma, Marcus Williams strode toward them with the confident swagger that came from a lifetime of privilege and recent professional success. At 6'2", with perfectly styled blonde hair and a custom-tailored suit, Marcus embodied everything David felt he lacked. "Congratulations on the promotion," David said, extending his hand. Marcus shook it with a grip that seemed designed to prove his dominance. "Thanks, man. It's been a long time coming. Dad finally realized I was ready to handle the big accounts." "Where are Mom and Dad?" Emma asked, scanning the elegant dining room. "Dad's finishing up a conference call with Tokyo, and Mom's running late from her board meeting. They'll be here in a few minutes." Marcus gestured toward a table by the windows. "Come on, let's grab some drinks." As they settled at the linen-covered table, David tried to ignore the way Marcus kept glancing at his off-the-rack suit and department store tie. The contrast between the brothers-in-law was stark. Marcus radiated the confidence of someone born into wealth, while David carried himself with the careful posture of someone who had always felt like he was performing in a play where he didn't know all the lines. "So, David," Marcus said, leaning back in his chair with a glass of expensive whiskey, "how's the freelance work going? Still designing logos for coffee shops?" "I'm working with several small businesses," David replied evenly, "helping them build their brand identity and digital presence." "That's nice," Marcus said with barely concealed condescension. "Must be fulfilling to work with such humble clients." Emma shot her brother a warning look. "David's work is important. Marcus, not every business can afford a major agency." "Of course not," Marcus agreed, his tone suggesting he thought this proved his point rather than contradicting it. "I just sometimes wonder if you couldn't aim a little higher. There are opportunities in corporate design, you know, companies that actually pay well." Before David could respond, Richard and Patricia Williams arrived, bringing with them the kind of commanding presence that came from decades of moving in New York's financial elite. Richard was a distinguished man in his early 60s, silver-haired and impeccably dressed, while Patricia maintained the polished elegance of someone who had never worried about money. "Emma, darling," Patricia said, kissing her daughter's cheek before offering David a perfunctory nod. "David, Mr. and Mrs. Williams," David replied, standing to greet them properly. "Please sit," Richard said, taking his place at the head of the table. "Sorry we're late. The markets in Asia have been volatile, and we had to handle some client concerns." As they ordered dinner from the restaurant's exclusive menu, David found himself calculating the cost of each dish and wondering if he could afford to pick up the check if politeness demanded it. The prices weren't listed, a sure sign that cost wasn't supposed to be a consideration for the clientele. "So, Marcus," Patricia said, raising her wine glass, "tell us about your new responsibilities." Marcus launched into a detailed description of his promotion, describing million-dollar deals and high-profile clients with obvious pride. David listened politely, but he could feel the familiar weight of inadequacy settling over him like a heavy coat. "We're so proud," Patricia said when Marcus finished. "It's wonderful to see the next generation taking over the family business." "What about you?" Richard asked, his tone suggesting polite obligation rather than genuine interest. "Any exciting projects coming up?" David described his current work designing a website and marketing materials for a veteran-owned bakery in Brooklyn, trying to convey his passion for helping small businesses succeed. But he could see the glazed expressions around the table and knew his work sounded trivial compared to Marcus's high-finance achievements. "That's nice," Patricia said, with the kind of smile reserved for children's art projects. "It must be satisfying to work on such simple projects." "Actually," Emma interjected, "David's work requires incredible creativity and business understanding. He has to understand each client's unique needs and translate their vision into something that will help them succeed in a competitive marketplace." "I'm sure it does," Richard agreed diplomatically. "Though I have to say, Emma, sometimes I wonder if you might have aimed a little higher when you chose a husband." The words hung in the air like a challenge, and David felt his cheeks burn with embarrassment. He had heard variations of this sentiment from Emma's family for years, but never so directly. "Dad," Emma said sharply, "that's inappropriate." "I'm just saying," Richard continued, seemingly oblivious to his daughter's discomfort. "You come from a family with significant resources and connections. You could have married someone someone who could match your background, someone who could contribute to the family's social standing," Patricia added. "Not that there's anything wrong with David's work, of course, it's just that you have to think about these things practically." Marcus leaned forward with the expression of someone delivering uncomfortable but necessary truth. "Emma, I know you love David, but let's be honest, you married a nobody. He's a nice guy, but he's never going to be able to provide for you the way you deserve." David felt something break inside him. 5 years of subtle slights, condescending comments, and being treated like an unwelcome guest at his own family dinners had finally crystallized into this moment of brutal honesty. "I may not come from money," David said quietly, "but I love Emma, and I work hard to build a life with her." "Love doesn't pay for private schools or vacations in Europe," Patricia observed. "It doesn't buy houses in the Hamptons or ensure financial security. Emma deserves better." Marcus added bluntly, "She deserves someone who can give her the life she's accustomed to." David looked at his wife, expecting her to defend him more forcefully, but Emma was staring down at her plate, her jaw clenched with what he interpreted as embarrassment. The silence stretched uncomfortably until Richard cleared his throat. "Look, David," Richard said with the patronizing kindness of someone delivering a difficult truth, "we're not trying to be cruel. We're just concerned about Emma's future. You seem like a decent person, but you have to understand our perspective." "What perspective is that?" David asked, his voice tight with controlled anger. "The perspective of parents who want their daughter to be happy and secure," Patricia replied. "And frankly, we don't see how a freelance graphic designer can provide that security." The dinner continued for another hour, but David barely participated in the conversation. He felt like he was drowning in their polite contempt, suffocating under the weight of their expectations and judgments. When they finally left the restaurant, he and Emma walked in tense silence toward the subway station. "I'm sorry," Emma said finally as they waited for the train. "They were completely out of line tonight. Were they wrong, though?" David asked, the question that had been building inside him finally finding voice. "Am I really just a nobody who isn't good enough for you?" Emma turned to face him, her eyes blazing with an emotion he couldn't quite read. "David Chen, you are the kindest, most talented, most genuine person I've ever known. Don't let their small-minded thinking make you doubt yourself." But as the train carried them back to their modest apartment in Brooklyn, David couldn't shake the feeling that Emma's family had finally said out loud what everyone in her circle had been thinking for years. He was a nobody who had somehow convinced a somebody to marry him, and eventually, the truth of that mismatch would become impossible to ignore. What David didn't know was that Emma Chen Williams carried secrets that would soon turn her family's assumptions upside down, and that their cruelest insults were about to become their most embarrassing mistakes. 3 days after the disastrous family dinner, David sat in his cramped home office, trying to focus on designing a logo for a local pet grooming business. But his concentration was shattered by the echoing words of Emma's family. "You married a nobody." The phrase had been replaying in his mind like a broken record, undermining his confidence and making him question everything about his marriage. Emma had been unusually quiet since that evening, spending long hours on her laptop and taking mysterious phone calls that she ended whenever David entered the room. He was beginning to wonder if her family's brutal honesty had finally made her see their relationship the way everyone else apparently did. "David," Emma called from the living room of their 2-bedroom Brooklyn apartment. "Can you come out here for a minute? We need to talk." David's stomach dropped. Those were the words every married person dreaded hearing, especially after a week of tension and uncomfortable silences. He saved his work and walked into their living room, where Emma was sitting on their second-hand couch with her laptop open and several legal documents spread across their coffee table. "Sit down," Emma said gently, patting the cushion beside her. "There's something I need to tell you, something I should have told you a long time ago." David perched on the edge of the couch, his mind racing through possibilities. Was she asking for a divorce? Had she finally realized her family was right about their fundamental incompatibility? "David," Emma began, her voice careful and measured, "I haven't been completely honest with you about my financial situation." "What do you mean?" David asked, confused. He knew Emma had a trust fund from her grandparents and worked part-time as a consultant, but they had always lived modestly on his income and her small contributions. Emma took a deep breath and turned her laptop screen toward him. "I need to show you something." David found himself looking at an investment portfolio dashboard that showed numbers so large they seemed almost fictional. Account balances in the millions, stock holdings in dozens of major corporations, real estate investments across 3 states. The total portfolio value at the bottom of the screen read, $47 million. This can't be real," David stammered, looking back and forth between the screen and his wife's face. "It's real," Emma confirmed, "and it's mine. Technically, it's ours now, since we're married." David stared at the screen, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. "Emma, this says you own significant positions in Apple, Google, Tesla. How is this possible?" "Remember when I told you I did consulting work?" Emma asked. "That was true, but I didn't tell you what kind of consulting. I've been a private investor for the past 8 years, using money I inherited from my maternal grandmother to build a portfolio." Emma pulled up another screen showing transaction histories dating back nearly a decade. "Grandma Rose left me $1 million when I died in 2017. Instead of letting it sit in a trust fund like my parents expected, I started investing it. Small positions at first, learning the market, making mistakes, but gradually building expertise." "But how did you know what to invest in?" David asked, still trying to comprehend the magnitude of what he was seeing. "I studied," Emma replied simply. "I spent 3 years reading everything I could about investing, took online courses, attended seminars. I started with index funds and blue-chip stocks. But then I began researching emerging technologies and companies that I thought had potential." She scrolled through a list of transactions that read like a greatest hits collection of the past decade's most successful investments. "I bought Tesla when it was trading at $40 a share. I invested in Bitcoin when it was under $1,000. I got into several AI companies before they went public." David's head was spinning. "Emma, this means you're incredibly wealthy." "Yes," she acknowledged, "independently wealthy. More wealthy than my parents, actually, though they don't know it." "Why didn't you tell me?" David asked, feeling a complex mix of emotions, confusion, hurt, and something that might have been relief. Emma closed the laptop and turned to face him fully. Because I wanted to know that you love me for who I am, not what I have. I've seen too many relationships destroyed by money. Too many people who were only interested in wealth and status. But we've been living like we're barely making ends meet, David protested. I've been stressing about mortgage payments and student loans, while you've been sitting on $47 million. I know, Emma said, her voice filled with regret, and I'm sorry for that. But I needed to know that we could build a life together based on love and partnership, not financial dependency. David stood up and walked to their small kitchen, trying to process this information. Their entire marriage had been built on what he now realized was a fundamental deception. What else haven't you told me? Nothing important, Emma assured him. David, my feelings for you, our relationship, everything between us, that's all real. The only thing I hid was the money, only the money, David repeated incredulously. Emma, this changes everything, does it? She asked, challenging him. Are you a different person now than you were an hour ago? Am I? David considered this question seriously. He thought about their life together, their shared dreams, their long conversations, their mutual support through difficult times. Had any of that been based on their financial situation? I guess not, he admitted. But why are you telling me now? Emma's expression grew determined. Because after what my family said the other night, I realized it's time to stop hiding. They think you're a nobody who isn't good enough for me. But they have no idea that I'm probably the most successful investor any of them have ever met. She pulled out a folder filled with legal documents. David, I've been offered a position as a managing partner at Blackstone Capital Management. They want me to head up their emerging technologies investment division. David's eyes widened. Blackstone was one of the most prestigious investment firms in the world, a direct competitor to her father's company. How do they even know about your investment success? Word gets around in the financial world when someone consistently outperforms the market. By the margins I have, Emma explained. Especially when that someone is young and has a track record of identifying trends before they become obvious. What did you tell them? I told them I'd give them an answer after Christmas, Emma replied. But David, if I take this position, everything changes. Our financial situation, our social status, my family's perception of our marriage, everything. David sat back down on the couch, his mind racing through the implications. They offered you a position without knowing who your family is. They know who my family is, Emma clarified. But they also know that my investment performance over the past 8 years has been better than most of their senior partners. They want me because of what I've accomplished, not because of my last name. So when your family says I married a nobody, David said slowly, they're actually talking about someone who could buy and sell most of their clients. Emma smiled for the first time since the conversation began. Exactly. And I think it's time. They learned that lesson. As David absorbed this information, he felt a profound shift in his understanding of their marriage and his place in Emma's world. The woman he had fallen in love with wasn't just the privileged daughter of investment bankers. She was a financial genius who had built her own empire while letting him believe they were just a struggling young couple making their way in an expensive city. Emma, he said finally, why didn't you just tell your family about your success? Why let them treat me like I'm beneath you? Because I wanted to see who they really were, she replied. I wanted to know if they would judge people based on character and worth, or just on status and wealth. Unfortunately, I got my answer. David looked at his wife with new eyes, seeing not just the woman he loved but a formidable businesswoman who had been hiding her light under a bushel for reasons he was only beginning to understand. What happens now? He asked. Emma's smile grew wider and more mischievous. Now we get ready for Christmas dinner with my family. And I think it's time they met the real Emma Chen Williams. Christmas Eve at the Williams family estate in the Hamptons was always an elaborate affair, and this year was no exception. The sprawling mansion was decorated with thousands of lights, towering Christmas trees, and elegant garlands that had been arranged by Manhattan's most exclusive event planners. The guest list included prominent figures from New York's financial and social elite, exactly the kind of gathering where David usually felt most out of place. As he and Emma walked up the circular driveway, David marveled at how different he felt compared to previous family events. The revelation about Emma's secret wealth had shifted something fundamental in his perspective, though he was still processing the full implications of being married to one of the most successful private investors of her generation. "Remember," Emma whispered as they approached the front door, "tonight we're not hiding anymore." David nodded, straightening his tie, a much more expensive one that Emma had insisted on buying for the occasion. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" "I've been ready for 8 years," Emma replied, her voice carrying a steel he'd never heard before. "It's time my family learned who they've been talking to." The Williams family's Christmas Eve party was a testament to old money and established power. Crystal chandeliers illuminated rooms filled with priceless art, while servers in white gloves circulated among guests offering champagne and caviar. David recognized several faces from the financial news, hedge fund managers, investment bank CEOs, and prominent business leaders who shaped markets with their decisions. "David, Emma." Marcus approached them with his characteristic swagger, a brandy snifter in his hand and a slightly patronizing smile on his face. "Glad you could make it. I wasn't sure you'd be able to afford the trip out here." "We managed," Emma replied dryly. Patricia Williams materialized beside her son, resplendent, in a designer gown that probably cost more than David's annual income. "Emma, darling, you look lovely." "David, I'm surprised to see you here. I thought you might be working over the holidays." "Actually," David said, "Christmas Eve is usually pretty quiet." "In the graphic design world?" "Well, of course it is," Patricia replied with the kind of laugh that wasn't actually amused. "I imagine most of your clients are closed for the holidays." Before David could respond, Richard Williams approached their group, bringing with him a distinguished-looking couple in their 60s. "Emma, David, I'd like you to meet Harrison and Vivian Blackstone," Richard said, his tone suggesting this was an important introduction. Harrison founded Blackstone Capital Management. David felt Emma tense slightly beside him as they shook hands with the legendary investor. Harrison Blackstone was one of the most respected names in the financial world, known for his innovative investment strategies and his ability to identify emerging market trends. "Pleasure to meet you both," Harrison said warmly. "Richard tells me you're in graphic design." "David, must be interesting work." "It has its moments," David replied, uncertain where this conversation was heading. "And Emma," Vivian Blackstone added, "your father says you do some consulting work." "What type of consulting?" Emma exchanged a meaningful look with David before answering. "Investment consulting, actually. I help clients develop long-term portfolio strategies." "How interesting," Harrison said, his attention sharpening. "What's your approach to emerging markets?" "I focus on identifying technological trends before they reach mainstream adoption," Emma replied. "I look for companies with strong fundamentals that are positioned to benefit from societal shifts. Clean energy, artificial intelligence, biotechnology." Richard Williams looked puzzled by the sophistication of his daughter's answer, while Marcus frowned as if he couldn't quite reconcile this version of Emma with his assumptions about her professional life. "That's a smart approach," Harrison acknowledged. "What's your track record?" Emma smiled. "Over the past 8 years, I've averaged annual returns of 38%. The conversation around them gradually quieted as nearby guests overhead. Emma's claim, 38% annual returns over 8 years, was the kind of performance that legends were made of. 38%, Marcus laughed nervously. "Emma, come on. No one maintains returns like that consistently, actually." Harrison Blackstone interjected. "Someone did. We've been trying to recruit a private investor who's achieved exactly those numbers over exactly that time frame. Young woman, brilliant analytical mind, uncanny ability to spot trends before the market catches on." Richard Williams was staring at his daughter with growing comprehension and disbelief. "Emma, what exactly are you saying?" "I'm saying," Emma replied, her voice carrying clearly through the now quiet room, "that I've built a $47 million investment portfolio over the past 8 years. I'm saying that Blackstone Capital has offered me a managing partner position, and I'm saying that when you told my husband he was a nobody who wasn't good enough for me, you were speaking to one of the most successful private investors of my generation." The silence in the room was deafening. Patricia Williams looked as if she had been slapped, while Marcus stood with his mouth open, his brandy snifter frozen halfway to his lips. 47 million, Richard whispered. As of market close yesterday, Emma confirmed. Started with 2 million from Grandma Rose's inheritance. Turned it into something that makes me independently wealthy by any standard. Harrison Blackstone was grinning broadly. I knew it, you're E.C. Williams, the mystery investor everyone's been talking about. We've been trying to identify you for months. E.C. Williams, Patricia asked weakly. Emma Chen Williams, Emma clarified. I use my initials for professional purposes. Less biased that way. Marcus finally found his voice. But you live in Brooklyn. You shop at Target. You drive a Honda Civic. Because I choose to, Emma replied. Because I value experiences over possessions. And because I wanted to build a life with David based on love rather than money. She turned to address her parents directly. You called David a nobody. You said I married beneath me. You suggested I should have chosen someone who could contribute to the family's social standing. But David contributes something far more valuable than money or status. He contributes integrity, creativity, and unconditional love. Patricia was struggling to process this information. But why didn't you tell us? Why let us think? Because I wanted to see who you really were, Emma said, her voice growing stronger. I wanted to know if you would value David for his character, or dismiss him for his bank account. Unfortunately, I got my answer. David watched this exchange with a mixture of pride and amazement. This was a side of Emma he had never seen, confident, commanding, and absolutely fearless in confronting the people who had spent years making him feel inadequate. Emma, Richard said carefully, we had no idea. If we had known about your success, you would have treated David differently, Emma finished. You would have shown him respect based on my net worth rather than his worth as a person. The truth of her words hung in the air like an accusation. The gathered guests, many of whom had witnessed the entire exchange, began whispering among themselves. Clearly fascinated by this unexpected drama, David, Harrison Blackstone said, turning to him with new interest, you must be very proud of your wife's accomplishments. I am, David replied, finding his voice, though I have to admit, I only learned about them a few days ago. She kept it secret even from you. Vivian Blackstone asked with obvious admiration. That shows remarkable discipline and wisdom. Marcus was still struggling to reconcile this revelation with his assumptions. Emma, if you're really worth that much money, why are you living like normal people? Because we are normal people, Emma replied. We just happen to have more money than we need. Money doesn't change who you are unless you let it. As the evening progressed, David found himself in the unusual position of being treated with newfound respect by people who had previously dismissed him. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. Suddenly his opinions mattered, his work seemed more interesting, and his presence was actively sought rather than merely tolerated. But the person who impressed him most was Emma, who navigated the complex social dynamics with grace and strength, making it clear that while she was willing to reveal her financial success, she wasn't apologizing for keeping it private or for choosing love over status. As they prepared to leave the party, Richard Williams approached them one final time. Emma, he said quietly, I owe you and David an apology. We judged him unfairly, and we underestimated you completely. Yes, you did, Emma agreed. The question is whether you learned anything from it. As they drove back to the city, David reflected on the evening's revelations and transformations. His wife wasn't just wealthy, she was brilliant, strategic, and stronger than he had ever imagined. And somehow, despite having every reason to choose a life of luxury and status, she had chosen him. 6 months after the Christmas Eve revelation, that had turned the Williams family dynamics upside down. David Chen sat in his new office on the 35th floor of a Manhattan skyscraper, reviewing the final concepts for a rebranding campaign. That would have been unimaginable a year earlier. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was now the creative director for several major corporate accounts, not because his wife's wealth had bought him the position, but because her connections had opened doors that allowed his talent to be properly recognized. Emma had taken the managing partner position at Blackstone Capital, and her reputation in the investment world had grown even further. Financial publications regularly featured her insights on emerging technologies, and she had become a sought-after speaker at investment conferences around the globe. But perhaps more importantly, their marriage had evolved into something stronger and more honest than either of them had expected possible. "Mr. Chen?" His assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Mrs. Chen Williams is here to see you." "Send her in," David replied, smiling at Emma's insistence on maintaining her professional name despite the occasional confusion it caused. Emma entered his office wearing a tailored business suit that projected the confidence and authority she had earned in the financial world. But when she saw David, her professional demeanor softened into the warm smile he had fallen in love with years earlier. "How's the Richardson Industries campaign going?" she asked, settling into the chair across from his desk. "Better than expected," David replied, showing her the concepts spread across his workspace. "They love the direction we're taking. Turns out Fortune 500 companies really do appreciate good design when they can see it properly presented." Emma studied the materials with genuine interest. "These are incredible, David. You've always been talented, but this work is on another level entirely." "Having proper resources makes a difference," David acknowledged. "Being able to hire the best photographers, work with premium printers, present to clients in professional settings. It all contributes to how the work is perceived and received." "And how do you feel about that?" Emma asked. "About success coming partly through connections rather than purely through merit?" It was a question David had wrestled with for months. "Initially, I felt like I was cheating somehow, but I've realized that everyone in business succeeds through a combination of talent, hard work, and opportunity. You created opportunities for me, but I still had to deliver results." Emma nodded approvingly. "Exactly. Money and connections can open doors, but they can't make you talented or hardworking. They just ensure that your talent and hard work get noticed by the right people." David leaned back in his chair, reflecting on how dramatically his life had changed. "Your family's treating me very differently now, how so?" "Your father called yesterday to ask my opinion about a marketing strategy for one of Meridian's client companies. Marcus invited us to dinner at his place next weekend. Your mother sent me an article about emerging trends in brand design." Emma laughed. "And how does that make you feel?" "Honestly, a little sad," David admitted. "It confirms that they never saw me as worthy of respect until they learned about your money. They're not treating me better because they've discovered my worth. They're treating me better because they've reassessed my status. That says more about them than it does about you," Emma observed. "I know, but it's still disappointing to realize that people I wanted to like me for who I am only started respecting me because of what I'm connected to." Emma stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a spectacular view of Manhattan. "David, do you know why I really kept my wealth secret from you? You said you wanted to know that I loved you for yourself, not your money." "That was part of it," Emma agreed. "But there was another reason. I was afraid that if you knew about my financial success, you would feel intimidated or diminished. I was afraid you would see yourself the way my family saw you, as someone who wasn't enough." David joined her at the window. "And were you right to be afraid?" "I don't know," Emma said honestly. "How do you feel about being married to someone who's worth $50 million and counting?" David considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I feel proud that someone so successful chose to build a life with me. Sometimes I feel motivated to achieve more myself. And sometimes I feel grateful that we're partners in this crazy adventure." "And do you ever feel diminished, less than I expected to?" David replied. "I think because I've seen how much you value what I bring to our relationship. You didn't marry me despite my background. You married me because of who I am, including my background." Emma smiled and took his hand. "David, my money didn't make me smart or kind or interesting. It just gave me options and security. What makes our marriage work isn't our bank account. It's the fact that we challenge each other, support each other, and genuinely enjoy each other's company." Speaking of which, David said, "I have some news. I've been offered a partnership in a new creative agency. 3 other designers who've worked with major brands want to start their own firm, and they want me to be the 4th partner." Emma's eyes lit up with excitement. "David, That's amazing. Are you going to take it? I want to. But I wanted to discuss it with you first. It would mean leaving the security of my current position and investing our own money into the startup. Our money, Emma corrected gently. And yes, absolutely you should do it. Following your entrepreneurial dreams is exactly what money should enable us to do. As they stood together looking out at the city that had once seemed so intimidating to David, he reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. A year ago, he had felt like an outsider in Emma's world, convinced that he wasn't good enough for her family's standards. Now he understood that the problem had never been his worthiness. It had been their inability to see value beyond wealth and status. Emma, he said, do you ever regret keeping the secret for so long? Sometimes, she admitted. I regret that you spent years feeling insecure about our relationship when you never needed to. I regret that my family's judgment caused you pain. But I don't regret learning who you really are when money wasn't a factor in our relationship. And who am I really? Emma turned to face him fully, her expression serious and loving. You're someone who works hard for what he believes in. You're someone who treats people with respect regardless of their status. You're someone who chose to love me before you knew about my money, and who continues to love me the same way now. That you do know. Those sound like the qualities of someone worth marrying, David observed. Exactly, Emma agreed. It just took my family longer to see it than it should have. As they prepared to leave the office together, David felt a profound sense of gratitude for the unexpected turns their story had taken. He had learned that worth wasn't measured in dollars, that respect earned through character was more valuable than respect granted through status, and that the best partnerships were built on mutual appreciation rather than financial dependency. Emma had taught him that keeping secrets could sometimes protect something precious, that timing mattered in revelations, and that true wealth was having someone who valued you for who you were becoming rather than what you possessed. And together, they had learned that the most meaningful success came not from proving others wrong, but from building a life that reflected their shared values and dreams. 6 months later, when David's creative agency landed its first major client and Emma's investment fund achieved record-breaking returns, they celebrated not because they had proven themselves to anyone else, but because they had built something meaningful together, a partnership based on love, respect, and the courage to be authentically themselves in a world that often valued appearance over substance.